The radio crackled with static, then died. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Reaper Sullivan pressed his back against the crumbling concrete wall, feeling the vibrations of incoming mortar rounds through his spine. 6 hours. That's how long Team Bravo had been pinned down in this godforsaken compound on the outskirts of Kandahar, and their extraction window had closed 43 minutes ago. Control, this is Reaper 16, requesting immediate air support, over. His voice carried the controlled desperation of a man who'd calculated their odds and didn't like the math. The Taliban had them surrounded on 3 sides, using the maze of abandoned buildings like a funnel. Every minute they stayed meant more fighters closing the noose. The response came through layers of interference. Reaper 16, negative on air support. All assets have been recalled due to weather conditions. You're on your own until dawn, over. Sullivan's jaw tightened. Weather conditions. The sky above was clear enough to count stars, but somewhere in a climate-controlled operations center, someone had made a decision that condemned 8 Navy SEALs to fight their way through 100 insurgents with nothing but small arms and dwindling ammunition. Copy that, Control. Reaper 16 out. He clicked off the radio and looked at his team. Hernandez was applying pressure to Morrison's shoulder wound while Fletcher kept watch on the eastern approach. The younger guys, Patterson and Rookie Williams, were trying to look calm, but their eyes betrayed them. They'd all heard the transmission. "So what's the plan, boss?" Sergeant First Class David Ghost Hernandez asked, his voice barely audible over the distant chatter of AK-47s. 23 years in the teams had taught him when to trust command and when to prepare for the worst. Sullivan studied his tablet, calculating distances and ammunition counts. The compound sat in a valley with steep ridges on both sides, perfect for an ambush, terrible for escape. Their only viable route led through 2 kilometers of open ground with minimal cover. In daylight, it would be suicide. In darkness, with Taliban forces converging from multiple directions, it might just be a slower form of suicide. "We hold until 400, then make our move toward Extraction Point Charlie," he decided. "Travel light, travel fast, and—" The words died in his throat. High above them, barely audible over the wind, came a sound that every ground soldier knew by heart but few expected to hear when command had already written them off. The deep, rhythmic thrumming of 4 turboprops cutting through the night sky like the world's most beautiful death song. An AC-130 Spectre gunship had just arrived uninvited to their private war. The radio erupted back to life with a voice none of them recognized, calm, professional, and distinctly female. "Reaper 16, this is Banshee 27. Heard you boys might need a hand down there. Light up your targets and keep your heads down. We're going to make some noise, over." Sullivan grabbed his radio so fast he nearly dropped it. Command had said no air support. Command had said all assets were recalled. Command had apparently forgotten to tell Banshee 27, and right now, he'd never been happier about military communication failures. The AC-130 Spectre is a beast that defies conventional aircraft logic. A cargo plane stripped down and rebuilt into a flying artillery platform that turns left-hand circles around targets while raining precision death from the sky. Its arsenal includes a 25 Gatling gun, 40 Bofors cannon, and 105 howitzer, each capable of surgically removing threats while leaving friendlies untouched, assuming the crew knows what they're doing. Tonight, Banshee 27's crew clearly knew exactly what they were doing. "Roger, Banshee 27, marking targets now," Sullivan responded, pulling out his infrared strobe. Around the compound, Taliban fighters were repositioning, trying to set up mortars and heavy machine guns for a final push. They had no idea what was about to rain down on them from 25,000 feet. The first burst came from the 25 cannon, a sound like the world's largest zipper being torn open at light speed. Tracer rounds lit up the night in streams of red death, walking across Taliban positions with mechanical precision. The enemy's muzzle flashes disappeared one by one as concrete exploded and men dove for cover that no longer existed. "Holy shit," whispered Patterson, watching the light show through his night vision goggles. "It's like watching God play video games." But Sullivan was studying the pattern of fire, noting how the rounds landed exactly where they needed to be, close enough to suppress the enemy, far enough away to avoid fratricide. This wasn't some rookie crew getting lucky. This was surgical application of overwhelming firepower by people who'd done this dance before. Banshee 27, this is Reaper 16. Outstanding work up there. Can you maintain station for extract movement in 30 mics? The response came immediately. Reaper 16, Banshee 27. We've got plenty of fuel and more ammunition than targets. Take your time down there. Nobody's leaving until you're all home safe, over. Something in that voice, the absolute confidence, the casual dismissal of danger, reminded Sullivan of his sister back in Ohio. Same matter-of-fact tone she'd used when promising to handle their father's funeral arrangements while Sullivan was deployed. Some people just had that quiet competence that made impossible things seem routine. He keyed the radio again. Banshee 27, requesting pilot identification for after-action report. A pause then. Reaper 16, Banshee call sign is sufficient. Let's focus on getting you home, over. Professional. Anonymous. Exactly the kind of response Sullivan expected from someone who'd probably been told to stay away from this operation and had decided to show up anyway. Military careers had been ended for less, but Banshee 27 was risking court-martial to save 8 strangers she'd never met. The 40mm cannon joined the conversation, its slower, deeper voice punctuating the night with methodical precision. Each round landed with the authority of divine judgment, turning Taliban firing positions into smoking craters. The enemy's coordinated assault was degenerating into chaos as fighters abandoned their weapons and fled into the maze of buildings beyond the compound. "Movement, southwest corner," Fletcher called out, spotting a group of insurgents trying to flank their position. Before Sullivan could respond, the 105mm howitzer spoke, once, with the voice of thunder. The southwest corner ceased to exist, replaced by a crater that glowed with residual heat. "Thanks for the heads-up," came Banshee's voice, as calm as if she were ordering coffee. "Keep calling out movement. We see everything up here, but local perspective helps with prioritization." Sullivan found himself grinning despite their situation. Whoever was flying that gunship had just turned their certain death into a turkey shoot, and she was thanking them for helping her do her job better. Either she was completely insane, or she was exactly the kind of pilot every ground unit prayed for. The Taliban had clearly reached the same conclusion. Their coordinated attack dissolved into a rout as fighters streamed away from the compound, abandoning equipment and wounded comrades in their haste to escape the mechanical death circling overhead. Banshee 27, this is Reaper 16. Target area appears clear. Ready to begin movement to extraction point Charlie on your word, over. Roger, Reaper 16. Route is clear. Will maintain overwatch during your movement. Move when ready, over. Sullivan gathered his team with hand signals. Morrison was mobile despite his shoulder wound, and Williams had stopped looking like he was about to vomit. The trek to extraction point Charlie would take them through 2 kilometers of broken terrain, but with Banshee 27 overhead, it felt less like a death march and more like a guided tour through hell with the world's best guardian angel. They moved out in standard formation, Fletcher on point, Sullivan calling positions, Ghost bringing up the rear with his sniper rifle ready for anything that might have survived the AC-130's attention. Above them, the Spectre continued its lazy left-hand circles, sensors sweeping the darkness for threats that no longer dared show themselves. Reaper 16, be advised, we have heat signatures moving parallel to your route, approximately 800 meters north, Banshee reported. Appears to be a dozen individuals with weapons, moving to intercept your path to extraction. Sullivan halted the team with a closed fist. Can you engage? Negative, Reaper. They're using a civilian compound for cover. We need them in the open, or we need positive identification of hostile intent before engagement. The professional restraint in her voice told Sullivan everything he needed to know about Banshee 27's crew. They weren't cowboys looking for targets of opportunity. They were disciplined soldiers who understood rules of engagement, even when those rules made their job harder. Roger, Banshee. Will adjust route to avoid contact. Negative, Reaper. Hold current position. Let me see if I can encourage them to show their intentions. What followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare. The AC-130 broke its circular pattern and made a low, slow pass directly over the civilian compound where the heat signatures were hiding. The message was clear. We see you. We know where you are. If you're thinking of starting trouble, remember what happened to your friends at the other compound. The heat signatures scattered like roaches when the lights came on. Reaper 16, your route is clear. Resume movement. Outstanding work, Banshee 27. Beginning movement now. They covered the remaining distance without incident, reaching extraction point Charlie just as the horizon began showing the first hints of dawn. The pickup zone was a flat stretch of desert that had been chosen for its clear sight lines and lack of cover. Good for landing helicopters, bad for troops waiting to be picked up if hostiles decided to crash the party. Banshee 27, Reaper 16 in position at extraction point Charlie. Request continued overwatch until pickup arrives. Over. Roger, Reaper 16. We have station time remaining. Any idea on pickup ETA? Sullivan checked his watch and did the math. The extraction birds would have launched from forward operating base Chapman 30 minutes ago, which put them about 20 minutes out. Estimate 20 mics, Banshee. Copy. We'll keep the airspace clear for them. The next 20 minutes passed in relative quiet, with only the distant sound of the AC-130's engines and the occasional radio check to break the silence. Sullivan used the time to tend to Morrison's shoulder wound and check his team's equipment. They'd burned through most of their ammunition during the siege, but thanks to Banshee 27, they wouldn't need to fight their way out. When the extraction helicopters appeared as dots on the southern horizon, Sullivan felt something he hadn't experienced since this whole nightmare began: the certainty that they were all going home. Banshee 27, pickup is inbound. Request you maintain station until we're airborne. Over. Roger, Reaper 16. We'll stay until the last bird is clear. The helicopters, 2 Black Hawks with door gunners scanning for threats, flared into the pickup zone with the practiced efficiency of crews who'd done this hundreds of times. Sullivan's team loaded quickly, with Ghost helping the wounded Morrison into the lead aircraft, while Sullivan took a final look around the desert that had nearly become their grave. Reaper 16, this is Black Hawk 71. All personnel on board, ready for departure. Over. Roger, 71. Banshee 27, Reaper 16 is clear and departing. We owe you one hell of a debt up there. For the first time all night, there was a pause before Banshee responded. When she did, her voice carried something that might have been emotion, quickly suppressed. Negative debt, Reaper 16. Just doing the job. Glad you're all going home safe. Banshee 27 out. Sullivan watched through the helicopter's window as the AC-130 climbed into the brightening sky, its mission complete. In a few hours, Banshee 27 would land at whatever base she'd launched from, debrief with intelligence officers who would classify everything about tonight's operation, and disappear back into the anonymity of the Air Force Special Operations Command. He'd probably never know her real name, never get to properly thank the crew that had saved 8 lives by showing up when command said no help was coming. But somewhere in the military personnel system, a pilot and her crew had just earned decorations they'd never be allowed to talk about publicly. As the helicopter banked toward home, Sullivan keyed his radio one last time on the frequency Banshee had used. Banshee 27, if you're still monitoring, this is Reaper 16. Unknown pilot, you and your crew are the definition of what we fight for. Thank you. The response was immediate, professional, and final. Copy that, Reaper. Safe travels home. But in those 4 words, Sullivan heard something that would stay with him for the rest of his career. The voice of someone who understood that coming home safe meant more than just surviving. It meant preserving what made them worth saving in the first place. 24 hours later, Sullivan sat in the debriefing room at Bagram Air Base, facing a colonel who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The after-action report had raised questions that nobody seemed eager to answer. Lieutenant Commander, according to your report, an AC-130 provided close air support during your extraction from grid reference 4827. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Call sign Banshee 27. The colonel consulted his tablet, frowning. There's no record of any AC-130 operations in that area on that date. All Spectre assets were grounded due to weather conditions. Sullivan met the colonel's gaze steadily. Sir, with respect, someone forgot to tell Banshee 27 about the weather. Without their intervention, Team Bravo would have been overrun. Lieutenant Commander, I need you to understand the seriousness of this situation. If an AC-130 crew disobeyed direct orders to remain grounded. Sir, Sullivan interrupted, I need you to understand that 8 Navy SEALs are alive today because someone decided that orders don't always trump the right thing to do. Whatever administrative action you're considering, I hope you'll weigh it against the fact that those 8 lives include some of the finest warriors this country has ever produced. The colonel set down his tablet and leaned back in his chair. After a long moment, he spoke. Lieutenant Commander, your after-action report will reflect that Team Bravo successfully extracted from a hostile area after receiving fire support from friendly forces. The specific details of that support will be classified above your clearance level. Are we clear? Crystal clear, sir. Good. Now, unofficially, between 2 officers who have both spent time downrange, do you have any idea who was flying that gunship? Sullivan shook his head. No, sir. Professional crew knew their business, maintained operational security throughout. Could have been anyone. But that wasn't entirely true. There had been something in Banshee's voice during those final radio calls, a quality Sullivan couldn't quite identify but couldn't forget. It reminded him of his sister, yes, but it was something more. A particular kind of competence that came from proving yourself over and over in a world that didn't expect you to succeed. 36 hours after the mission, Sullivan found himself in the chow hall at Bagram, picking at reconstituted eggs and thinking about voices in the dark. Ghost sat across from him, working through his 3rd cup of coffee and studying the morning intelligence briefings. You know what's been bothering me about the other night, Ghost said without looking up from his reports. What's that? The way Banshee handled that extraction. Perfect timing, surgical precision, maintained station until we were clear. That's not standard operating procedure for a crew that's supposed to be grounded. Sullivan set down his fork. What are you getting at? I'm getting at the fact that someone made a command decision to violate direct orders and risk court-martial to save our asses. And I'm wondering what kind of pilot has the balls to make that call. Before Sullivan could respond, Fletcher dropped into the seat beside them, looking unusually animated. You guys hear the scuttlebutt about Spectre operations? What's scuttlebutt? Apparently, there's been some shuffling in Air Force Special Operations Command. Word is they're dealing with some kind of personnel issue involving unauthorized missions. Ghost and Sullivan exchanged glances. What kind of personnel issue? Fletcher lowered his voice. The kind where someone's career gets ended quietly and they disappear from the active duty roles. But here's the interesting part. According to my Air Force buddies, it's not disciplinary. It's medical. Medical. Yeah, apparently. One of their AC-130 pilots got pulled from flight status after a routine physical revealed some kind of condition. Career-ending stuff. Sullivan felt something cold settle in his stomach. When? 2 days ago, right after our mission. The three SEALs sat in silence, processing the implications. Somewhere in the Air Force system, a pilot who had risked everything to save 8 strangers was now facing the end of a career that had probably defined her entire adult life. The symmetry was brutal. She'd saved their futures by sacrificing her own. "We need to find out who she was," Sullivan said finally. "Why?" Ghost asked. "What can we do?" "I don't know yet, but we owe her something more than just going on with our lives like it never happened." Finding information about classified Air Force operations turned out to be harder than infiltrating Taliban compounds. Sullivan spent the next week making discreet inquiries through his network of contacts, but Air Force Special Operations Command had locked down everything related to AC-130 operations during their mission timeframe. It was as if Banshee 27 had never existed. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Williams, the rookie who'd nearly thrown up during the firefight, approached Sullivan after evening chow with information that changed everything. "Sir, I think I found something about our guardian angel." Sullivan looked up from his paperwork. "I'm listening." "My girlfriend works in medical administration at Randolph Air Force Base in Texas. She processes separation physicals for aircrew members. She can't give me specifics, but she mentioned that they've had an unusual number of AC-130 pilots getting grounded lately for various medical reasons." "How many?" "3 in the past month, all female, all with distinguished service records. And here's the kicker, one of them had the nickname Banshee on her medical paperwork." Sullivan set down his pen. After 2 weeks of dead ends, they finally had a lead. "Did your girlfriend mention anything else?" "Just that the pilot in question had been flagged for immediate separation from active duty. Something about a hereditary condition that disqualifies aircrew members from flight status." "Where is she now?" Williams hesitated. "That's the problem, sir. According to the paperwork, she's already been processed out, separated from active duty last week and disappeared into the civilian world." Sullivan stared at the wall of his temporary quarters, trying to process what Williams had just told him. The woman who had saved their lives was now facing the same kind of involuntary transition that had claimed so many other military careers: the sudden, brutal severing of identity that came with medical separation. But unlike most medical separations, hers had been preceded by an act of heroism that would never appear in any official record. She traded her career for 8 lives, and now she was dealing with the aftermath alone, wherever Air Force bureaucracy had deposited her in the civilian world. "Sir," Williams asked, "what do we do?" Sullivan made a decision that would define the rest of his military career. "We find her." The search took 6 months and involved calling in favors from contacts across 3 service branches. Sullivan learned things about military bureaucracy he'd never wanted to know, including the fact that medical separations created paper trails that disappeared into classification levels above his clearance. But persistence and the network of warriors who understood debt eventually paid off. The name was Captain Lydia Banshee Reeves, 29 years old, formerly of the 4th Special Operations Squadron out of Hurlburt Field, Florida. 8 years of distinguished service flying AC-130 gunships, including 3 combat deployments and 2 air medals for extraordinary achievement in aerial flight. Separated from active duty due to a hereditary eye condition that had suddenly manifested during a routine physical exam. Current location: Denver, Colorado, working as a flight instructor at a civilian aviation school and living in a studio apartment 20 minutes from the airport. Sullivan found her on a Saturday afternoon at Centennial Airport, teaching a nervous teenager how to perform pre-flight inspections on a Cessna 172. She looked exactly like he'd imagined, and nothing like he'd expected. Average height, brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing civilian flight instructor clothes that couldn't hide the military bearing in her posture. He watched from a distance as she guided her student through the inspection routine, noting how she combined patience with precision, encouragement with technical expertise. This was someone who'd spent years teaching people to master complex aircraft in life-or-death situations, now reduced to showing teenagers how to check oil levels and tire pressure. When the lesson ended and the student headed inside to debrief, Sullivan approached the aircraft where she was securing the engine covers. "Excuse me, are you Lydia Reeves?" She turned, and Sullivan saw the moment of recognition in her eyes, not of him personally, but of what he represented. Military bearing was hard to hide, even in civilian clothes. "Depends who's asking." "Lieutenant Commander Marcus Sullivan, Navy SEALs. I go by Reaper." The name hit her like a physical blow. Sullivan watched her face cycle through recognition, understanding, and something that might have been fear. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she said, turning back to the aircraft. "No, I don't think I do. 6 months ago in Afghanistan, my team was pinned down in a compound outside Kandahar. Air support had been recalled due to weather conditions. Then an AC-130 Callsign Banshee 27 showed up and saved 8 lives." Reeves continued working on the engine cover, but Sullivan could see the tension in her shoulders. "Like I said, you've got the wrong person." "Captain Reeves." "It's Ms. Reeves now," she corrected, finally turning to face him. "And whatever you think happened over there, I can't help you." Sullivan studied her face, nodding the controlled wariness of someone who'd been burned by official attention. "I'm not here in any official capacity. I'm here because 8 Navy SEALs owe you their lives, and we wanted to say thank you." For the first time, her composure cracked slightly. "You shouldn't be here." "Why not?" "Because," she stopped, looking around the civilian airport with its weekend pilots and flight students, then back at Sullivan. "Because that part of my life is over." "It doesn't have to be." Reeves laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't understand. I'm medically disqualified from military flight status. Permanent. Non-waverable. My career ended the day some flight surgeon noticed an irregularity in my vision that's been there since birth, but decided to manifest just in time to ruin everything I'd worked for." Sullivan heard the bitterness in her voice and recognized it. He'd seen the same expression on the faces of countless warriors who'd been betrayed by their own bodies, the particular anguish of someone whose identity had been surgically removed by military medicine. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. Night vision degradation, peripheral field loss, depth perception issues. Nothing that affected my performance in combat, but enough to flunk a peacetime physical." She closed the engine compartment with more force than necessary. "They gave me 30 days to process out, and a disability rating that's supposed to make up for losing the only thing I ever wanted to do." "And the unauthorized mission." Reeves met his gaze directly for the first time. "What unauthorized mission?" Sullivan recognized the challenge in her voice. She was testing whether he was there to help or to cause more damage. "The one where you violated direct orders to remain grounded and saved 8 SEALs who were written off by command." "Even if such a mission had occurred," Reeves said carefully, "it would be classified above both our clearance levels and definitely not something to discuss in a civilian airport." "You're right," Sullivan agreed. "But hypothetically, if someone had risked their career to save 8 strangers, those strangers might feel obligated to return the favor." "There are no favors to return. What's done is done." Sullivan watched her begin walking toward the flight school building, recognizing the dismissal, but he'd come too far to give up now. "The SEALs have a saying," he called after her. "The only easy day was yesterday, But we also have another saying, no one left behind. Reeves stopped walking but didn't turn around. You didn't leave us behind in Afghanistan, Sullivan continued. We're not leaving you behind now. She turned slowly, and Sullivan saw something in her expression that hadn't been there before, a flicker of the person she'd been before the military had broken her spirit along with her career. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that 8 Navy SEALs who owe their lives to an Air Force pilot might be in a position to open some doors that seem closed. I'm proposing that the kind of person who risks court-martial to save strangers might be exactly the kind of person the private sector has been looking for. The private sector isn't interested in washed-up military pilots with medical issues. They might be interested in someone with your specific qualifications and security clearance. Reeves studied his face, clearly trying to determine whether he was offering hope or selling false promises. What kind of doors? The kind that lead to organizations that need people who understand that some things are more important than following orders. The kind that value judgment over regulations. Sullivan pulled out a business card and handed it to her. It was blank except for a phone number and the words, Executive Solutions International. What is this? It's a company that provides aviation services to organizations that can't use military assets for political reasons. Humanitarian operations in contested areas, diplomatic security, corporate executives who need transportation in places where commercial aviation doesn't go. Reeves examined the card. And you're connected to this company how? I'm not, but Ghost David Hernandez, one of my team members, is. His brother runs their helicopter operations division. They've been looking for someone with AC-130 experience to help them develop new capabilities for high-risk environments. I can't fly AC-130s anymore. Medical disqualification, remember. This wouldn't be AC-130s. It would be adapted civilian aircraft with specialized equipment. Same mission profile, different platform, and civilian medical standards are different from military standards. For the first time since Sullivan had approached her, Reeves looked genuinely interested. You're talking about private military contractors. I'm talking about people who provide aviation services to organizations that need them. Completely legal, properly licensed, well compensated. Reeves was quiet for a long moment, turning the business card over in her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, less guarded, more like the professional pilot who'd guided them through that night in Afghanistan. Why would you do this for me? Because 6 months ago, you proved that the right thing to do isn't always the same as what you're ordered to do. And because anyone with the judgment to make that call is someone worth having on our side. Sullivan left her with the business card and a promise to follow up in a week. As he walked away, he felt something he hadn't experienced since that night in the desert, the certainty that they were doing the right thing, regardless of what regulations or protocols said about it. 3 months later, Sullivan received a text message from an unknown number. Reaper 16, this is Banshee 27, back in the air and loving it. Thanks for not leaving me behind. LR. Attached was a photo of a civilian aircraft that had clearly been modified with equipment that didn't belong on any standard aviation platform. The tail number was blocked out, but Sullivan could see enough to know that Captain Lydia Reeves had found her way back to doing what she did best. The final piece of the story came 2 years later, when Sullivan was preparing to retire from the Navy and transition to civilian life himself. He'd kept in touch with several members of Team Bravo, but it was Ghost who provided the epilogue that completed their understanding of what had happened that night in Afghanistan. You know that company you connected Reeves with? Ghost asked during their final meeting at a bar near Norfolk Naval Base. Executive Solutions International, what about it? They just got a contract to provide air support for humanitarian operations in Somalia. Guess who's leading their aviation division? Sullivan raised his beer in a silent toast to a pilot he'd met once but would never forget. Somewhere over the Horn of Africa, Banshee 27 was back in the air, doing what she'd always done best, making impossible missions look routine. The night sky belonged to people like Lydia Reeves, and Sullivan was glad that bureaucracy hadn't been able to keep her grounded permanently. Some people were born to fly in the darkness, bringing hope to those who needed it most. The only easy day was yesterday, but today was looking pretty good too. In military operations, there are moments when everything hangs on a single decision made by someone who wasn't supposed to be there. 6 months after that night in Afghanistan, Sullivan understood that Banshee 27 hadn't just saved 8 Navy SEALs. She demonstrated something fundamental about what it meant to serve. Not everyone gets to go home. Not everyone gets a second chance. But sometimes, when the system fails and the orders don't make sense and good people are about to die for bureaucratic reasons, someone steps up and does the right thing anyway. Captain Lydia Banshee Reeves had paid the price for that decision with her military career, but she'd gained something more valuable: the knowledge that when it mattered most, she'd chosen correctly. And 8 Navy SEALs would carry that lesson with them for the rest of their lives, understanding that heroism isn't about following orders. It's about knowing when to break them.